VocalEye Almost Live Zoom. The longest way round is the shortest way home. Hosted by Amy Amantea. With special guests, Meichen Waxer, Whitney Brennan, Jess and Sarah Wong.
Welcome to this almost live event. My name is Amy Amantea. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Associate Director for VocalEye. I'm your host for these online events, and I am a member of the blind community. And I just want to say a big thank you to everybody who's joined us week after week after week, month after month after month, year after year after year on these special events. Really appreciate all the support and all the positivity you all bring into this space. We're grateful for all the letters of donations and testimonials, so keep those coming. And if you have the capacity to make a donation, those are also really helpful and help us bring this free programming to our community. So there's always a link that's posted in the chat if you would like to make a donation, or you can look us up on our website, vocaleye.ca. If you happen to be watching this event on our YouTube channel, we hope that you hover over to those little buttons and click on the like and subscribe. That would be really helpful for us. VocalEye is broadcasting to you all from the traditional and stolen lands of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Peoples. And I wanted to just share with you briefly about my experience with the Seventh Fire. So we had the Seventh Fire present as part of the Push Festival preview back in January, and I went to this audio experience. The experience was amazing, but what I'll tell you is the level of access that I received. Everything from sighted guide to being seated first in the space. It was incredible. And afterwards I said to the young woman, "Where did you learn, blind etiquette?" And she said to me, oh my God, I'm gonna cry. She said to me, "Nobody taught me." She said, "Don't we just treat people with dignity?" Oh my goodness, my heart stopped. I said to her, "You're gonna make me cry." She said, "You're gonna make me cry." I've never been in a space with somebody who's never been taught how to do sighted guide or to support somebody with blindness, who just saw me as a human being and thought that she could offer something that would make my experience that much greater. So I very, very much appreciated that in that moment. So I thought I'd share that with you all. And this young Indigenous woman is probably 19 years old. So think about all of the wonderful places that she's going to go in terms of access. So it's amazing. February is also Black History Month, and so I wanted to maybe do a little bit of an acknowledgement about Black History Month as well. And this, for me, this week is going to come in the form of a recommendation for a movie on Apple TV Plus. And this is, I highly recommend it. The audio description is excellent. So if you have Apple TV Plus, please check it out. It stars Will Smith, and it's called Emancipation. Some of you may have seen it already, and it follows the true story of Peter, who is an enslaved person at the time where Lincoln has freed enslaved people, and not the information has not gotten to everybody in the South, or people are ignoring it in the South, and so he flees. And we have the trailer that we're going to share with you, and it's not a described trailer, so I will just say during the times of music, Will Smith, Peter, the character Peter, is running. He's running from captors and fighting in wars. So that's what's happening. So Rick, if you will indulge us and just play this little trailer clip, I would love for folks to experience that.
Give thanks to God. The Lord is with us. What can a mere man do to me? I will come back to you!
You walk the earth because I let you. I'm your God now.
Slaves are free. We must get to Baton Rouge, through this swamp. Lincoln's army is dead. There are many ways to die in a swamp. get to my family.
What if you don't come back?
Your papa is going to be back. Do not ever stop believing that.
She's persistent. Running, hiding, surviving.
I fight them. They beat me. They whip me. They break the bones in my body more times than I can count. But they never break me.
All right. Thanks, Rick, for playing that. I just want to make a note about that because it's based on a true story. This human, Peter, they took a photograph of his back of all of his whippings, and it was the photograph that went viral, literally, in 1863, whatever that meant in 1863, and it gave the abolitionist movement proof of the cruelty of enslavement. So it's a really impactful piece, and I recommend that people check it out if you have access to Apple TV. I'm more of a friend who has access to Apple TV, so check that out. And one more thing I just want to acknowledge before we get into tonight's event is if we have capacity to make contributions to our friends in Turkey and in Syria who have experienced the earthquake in the last couple of days, a 7.8 biggest earthquake on the planet in the last 10 years. And they're already at more than 12,000 confirmed dead, 38,000 wounded, and they're anticipating another approximately 20,000 dead to be found. So heavy stuff this week, friends. But I think that it's important that we acknowledge these things, and so I offer that in the space this evening. So welcome. It's Wednesday, February the 8th, 2023. And tonight we're proud to offer you our Almost Live event number 109. The longest way round is the shortest way home. With our special guests in tonight, there's a few, but I'm going to welcome in Meichen and Whitney to start off. So welcome Meichen, welcome Whitney. Friends in the space, we got Meichen, and I'm sure Whitney will be popped on my screen anymore. I got 3 squares, so I know we got everybody. How are you this evening, friends?
Hi, Meichen speaking. Thank you so much, Amy, for having us here. We're really, really excited to share this work. And Whitney and I have just been texting each other every single day since you've asked us, basically saying we're so grateful to be able to share this work with an audience who is blind and can really access it. So we're really jazzed. I'm just gonna put my foot in my mouth. How excited we are.
Yeah. I'm jazzed that you're jazzed. That's amazing. Maybe if you can do a little like Meichen, we can start with you. Who is Meichen? A little background about Meichen and the organization, and we'll start there.
That sounds great. So again, my name's Meichen Waxer. I am a Caucasian female. I live in Toronto, Ontario. I was out in Vancouver for many years where I co-founded Arts Assembly, which is an organization that's focused on research and really connecting community to artistic practice and to paying people. That's our tenet.
Paying people. Woo! What a concept. Sorry.
No, you'd be surprised how foreign that can feel to some folks. So,
yeah.
But yeah, so that's Arts Assembly. I'm also a practicing artist myself. And yeah, I'm gonna hand it over to Whitney.
Who's Whitney?
Whitney here. I am also so grateful to be here and so excited. Working on this project was such a beautiful educational experience, and I'm so glad that Amy, we got to work with you and kind of be like gently but sternly shepherded into being able to make the access as best as we thought we could do. And so I'm really excited to hear how audiences experience it. But about me, I am based in Vancouver. I am, guess, the other half of the Arts Assembly directorial team. My background is in curatorial studies, but I am also a practicing artist now. And I'm also currently getting my Bachelor of Education to become a teacher. So that's kind of become my a lot of my time, but I love what we do with Arts Assembly, and like Meichen said, supporting artistic research and supporting not just with mentorship and curatorial opportunities, but with actually paying folks. And that's become a huge part of how we operate and what we stand for. So yeah, so excited to be sharing this today.
So this project is The Longest Way Round is the Shortest Way Home. Where did this project, what is this project? Where did it come from? Where did the idea come from? Who wants to take
Yeah,
it?
I can start and you fill in the gaps. So there was a commission, a call for commissions from the City of Toronto for public artwork that was temporal for the sculpture garden. And I went to the info session and I was like, you know what? There's this project that Whitney and I have been kind of ruminating around of wanting to work with dancers and explore interconnected ideas of home. And it seemed like the perfect opportunity to apply for it. So we did. For many reasons, the sculpture garden did not work out. But we found a better spot in Toronto for it to be. And in the Toronto end of things, we invited 4 artists, Jess, who's joined us here today, B. Solomon, Amelia Earhart, and Dana Rosales. All very different dance and artistic practitioners to come together and to do a call and response. In Toronto, it was quite iterative that they each got to perform and then respond to one another over the course of 3 weeks. And from the Toronto perspective, I really learned a lot about my own practice and my own my own connections to home and place through the act of witnessing over the course of the weeks with these incredible people. And in Vancouver, we wanted to have an echo of this, and I'll let Whitney speak to Vancouver.
Yeah, so Whitney speaking here. Yeah, in Vancouver, I mean, once we got the opportunity in Toronto, which, given that we got the opportunity during the pandemic, the City of Toronto was very accommodating and flexible with helping us find a different suitable location that would still support the real intention behind the project. And that was really important to us. We didn't want it to be something that just happened on a stage indoors, or we wanted the space to also be as accessible as possible. So having access to seating as well as even ground and those kinds of things, and easy by transportation were still things that were really important to us, and the city really worked with us on that. What was really interesting in Toronto is that we were originally had proposed it, and the project was supposed to happen in February, which February in Toronto, Mike, and I'm sure you can attest to this right now, is a little chilly. But we were like, they're dancers. All the dancers were on board. They were all okay with it. And then it ended up getting pushed eventually to September, which gave us in that time frame how to consider what Meichen said, this echo, this kind of accompaniment of programming in Vancouver. So we were able to propose very similar programming with 4 different dancers in Vancouver. So Sarah Wong, who's also joining us today, Harmony Rose, Josh Cole, and Marisa Gold, and working with them also to find a place that resonated with them was such a gift of the project, as it wasn't just okay, we have this particular theater or this particular venue. We really got to work with the dancers themselves, and then to their credit, the Parks Board of Vancouver, who are their own entity, in Vancouver, they're not directly connected to the city, so that's also interesting. They were super cooperative in helping us find a place that was accessible and that really made sense for the dancers. So we ended up at Tatlow Park in Kitsilano. And yeah, I mean, it just created this same kind of iterative call and response format on a smaller scale. Partly budget wise, but it also just worked out that the dancers got to be paired up, so they each responded to one another in twosomes, and that happened over one weekend in September. So, or I guess when was this, 2021?
Okay, so
Yes.
just to like reiterate, we're gonna witness. There's 4 dancers in Vancouver, there's 4 dancers in Toronto, but we're going to witness 2 dancers in Vancouver and 2 dancers in Toronto. And one dancer is going to do a piece, and then the other one's going to do a response to that piece. So that's sort of the setup. And just so like for context of the entire project, you had both able-bodied and able-bodied and non-able-bodied or disabled or people with disabilities as performers, as movers, as dancers, right?
That's correct.
Yes. Yeah. Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a really like for me that feels really important. I don't know how that all felt to you, but it sounds like it was important to make sure that there was different experiences represented.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when Sarah and Jess speak, they can speak to that a little bit more from a dancer's perspective as well. But yeah, for us, it was really important to kind of include, but also have those voices speak for themselves in terms of what their experience is like of talking about representing ideas of home and embodiment from their own experiences. So yeah, I'd love for them to be able to articulate that in how, I mean, we can talk about it from a curatorial perspective, but
well, that was really where the question came from, was that
totally.
as the folks who were putting out the call for artists, there's a decision to be made, right?
Yeah, I mean, across our programming, it was really emphasized within this project, is especially when the idea is to think through home, and how can you really think through home if all your dancers are able-bodied, all come from a certain access to dance education, which can equate to a certain access to wealth and to stability, like all of these different things were like, it just wasn't very interesting. I think if we just had, to be very blunt, it's just not very interesting to hear or to witness or to be in presence of what's already easily available. It's easily available to see like stories of success, so quote unquote, or stories of what is like championed within the dance world. The dance world itself can be, it can lean very heavily on able bodies and on whiteness and on a certain level of assumed athletic proficiency or performance. Exactly. Yeah. In one word, yes, privilege. So
I get that.
Yeah, as us as curators, and as really trying to think through complexities of home, complexities of relationship of home, also in 2 cities that were at the time experiencing huge encampments, a lot of housing instability. They're still both in a lot of economic turmoil with ever increasing costs of living. By just representing the expected dancer, I don't really think there'd be much success with this project.
Yeah, I get that. And these are all outdoors, so we're not in, which I love, right? We're not in like a stuffy old, I don't want to say stuffy old, because there are some lovely theaters, but it's breaking, I think for me, it feels like it's breaking the tradition of, or the convention that we expect when we see the privileged dance world.
Yeah, and another thing with it being outdoors, in Toronto there, and I assume too in Vancouver, I just wasn't physically there in Vancouver, but passerby stopped and sat and were able to engage. Folks came that knew it was happening, and they came as an audience that was like, I'm here for this. And then we had many people that were just passing by and became interested and we're able to access the performances at no cost and at very low barrier, as far as like you can sit, you can go, also you can stay for 1 second. You can just hover. You can hover and we won't mind.
And you can enjoy the moment just as you're passing by on your way to their bus
Exactly.
or something.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and that felt very important to have them outdoors for that sort of transient relationship, if that's what somebody needed in that day and in that moment.
Well, I think we should introduce our first video. So who would like to be the one to introduce it? This is Jess's work.
Well, I guess I can. And I apologize. It's 10 p.m. at night here in Toronto.
I know we got lots of folks coming, like from New York and Toronto. So we got a lot of folks from further east than west. So my joke is that you're joining us from the future.
I'm just saying it for my I feel like after 8 p.m. I become a bit of a scattered speaker.
You're doing just fine, Mike, and you're doing just fine.
Great. Yeah, so our first performance is a solo by Jess, which will be followed by a response by B. Solomon. These take place in Lisgar Park in Toronto.
All right. So, Whitney, anything you want to add?
No, I mean, I'm obviously sad that I didn't get to see these in person, as we kind of both had to be in our respective cities. But yeah, I love the way that Jess has taken the concepts that we brought to this project and really both, ran with it and also turned it completely on its head. And I just admire and love that about their performance style so much. So I'm so excited for you all to experience it.
Wonderful. So,
I would say more, but I would give spoiler alerts.
No, yeah, we'll talk about this afterwards when we come back. So friends, I would love for you to experience Jess's work. This video is just over 10 minutes long, so sit back and enjoy this. Rick, go ahead and hit play.
Following is a description of an unedited archival video of a 9-minute dance solo by Jess Sachi. This solo was commissioned by Arts Assembly as a part of their The Longest Way Round is the Shortest Way Home series, which took place in the late summer of 2021. As a part of this series, another dance artist, B. Solomon, was invited to respond spontaneously to Jess's performance. Video of that response can be found elsewhere on this site. These performances take place in Lisgar Park in Toronto, which is a wide-open concrete plaza. Jess is a non-binary artist with fair skin. They use they, them, their pronouns. They are short, with light brown hair worn in braids, unique facial features, a curve in their upper back, and they walk with an uneven gait. With humor, they sometimes describe themselves as a small gay gargoyle. For this solo, they wear a blue tank top with a cloud pattern, brown sweatpants, and tap shoes. Jess's artistic practice addresses how bodies move through public and private spaces and often makes use of props. This solo is no exception. The front quadrant of the plaza, where the whole solo takes place, is set with a folding chair, a wooden board about the size of a doormat, and an old mechanical metronome sitting on the concrete between the two. Additionally, Jess begins this solo by carrying a small round metal end table into the performance area. Thank you for listening to this introduction and enjoy the solo. Jess strolls into the performance area, carrying their metal table high over their head. Arriving between the wooden board and the chair, they do a squat, like a weightlifter with a barbell, showing off their strength. They jerk the table down from their head and begin arranging their things. First, tipping their table up to stand on its legs, then dragging their chair to sit next to it. Jess's demeanor is unhurried and casual as the audience watches to try to figure out exactly what they're up to. They plop into their seat and pull the table close to them, momentarily slumping their head and arms across its smooth surface. On second thought, they sit back up, push the table further away, and swing a leg up to rest on it, like they're trying to get comfortable. The other foot taps and brushes across the ground as they look around with an air of impatience, almost as though they're waiting for something else to happen. Having had enough of that, they swing their leg back off the table and amble over to the wooden board. They nudge it roughly with their toes until it rotates about 90 degrees. And then step onto it. The board is slightly warped, so it wobbles like a wiggly tooth as they shift curiously from side to side. They shuffle around the board as if testing it out, watching how it moves as they slide their tap shoes over its surface. Staring at their feet, they do a single, showy tap step, and then slink humbly backwards off the board. They raise their eyes towards the audience and flash a mischievous smile, as if amused with themselves for having shown precisely one impressive and recognizable dance step, before sauntering over to stand beside the table. With one hand resting on it for balance, they brush a foot over the ground, sweeping it from front to back like a horse kicking up dirt, relishing in the unconventional sound of metal taps on concrete. They rock their chair up onto its back legs and tip it side to side, so that the legs of the chair take incremental steps along the ground, like a giant mechanical bug. Jess puppets the chair back over to the board. Using the chair for stability, with one tap-shoed foot, they alternate between sweeping and tapping the surface of the board. Their focus is intense as they tune in to the different sounds and rhythms. After transferring the chair up onto the wooden board, they tip their body over its backrest to find an uncomfortable balance on their belly, their legs sticking out behind them in a teetering plank. The wind picks up and they lose stability, snapping back to their feet as though nothing happened. Resting for a moment, the breeze whips wisps of their braided hair around their peaceful face. They return to their endless tinkering by pushing the chair over and letting it collapse on the concrete beside the board. Kneeling behind it, they pick it up by the legs, then open and close the chair like a giant pair of rusty scissors. It's whimsical, but Jess's expression remains serious, invested in figuring out all the different ways that this chair can move. Never staying anywhere for too long, they decide to drag the folded chair across the plaza. Their face betrays no clue as to what they're up to and what might happen next. Pausing, they heave the chair onto their head, still folded, so that it rests flat, like the wide brim of a hat. They wear it as they trek back to the table, and then pause again for a moment, perching delicately on the table's rounded edge. Rest over, they get up and shuffle across the board, still holding the chair firmly on top of their head. With purpose, they set the chair up beside the board, across from the table. Suddenly struck by a new idea, they stride away from their setup, confidently leaving the frame of the camera. The metronome still sits in front of the board, untouched. A quiet reminder, perhaps, to think about time and tempo. When Jess returns, they're carrying a heavy gray storage box, big enough that it could hold a pair of boots. They slide the box onto the table and throw off its lid with an unexpected, dramatic flair, before transferring the box to the ground at their feet. Without hesitation, they pull out a handful of small copper pipes. They look almost like a set of wind chimes, but they're not attached to each other in any way. They push the table closer to the board and begin to unload the pipes onto the table with authority, as though teaching each pipe a lesson by putting it in its place. They work efficiently, reaching down for handful after handful, banging each one onto the table with an assertive clang, ensuring that they don't roll away. The tiny pipes lie on the table all in a row, parallel to each other. They almost cover the entirety of the small round surface, but Jess keeps finding space for more, placing them more gently now, so as not to disrupt the others. Inexplicably, they take a break from unloading. Rolling their shoulders back, they do a round kick over the pipes on the table, giving another fleeting impression of a recognizable dance move. They transition seamlessly, almost as though the kick never happened, face calm, back to unloading the box. They stack up the tiny pipes like logs so that they can all fit. Satisfied with their little pile of little pipes, they leave the table, clutching one last pipe in their hand as they wander over to the wooden board. Without a moment's pause, they ease down to their belly and prop themselves up on their elbows. They set the copper cylinder down below their face and delicately nudge it along the concrete, never letting it roll away beyond an arm's reach. They seem fascinated by this simple game, almost like a cat playing with a toy. But again, not for long. They grow listless and, not hiding the effort of the movement, hoist themselves back to their feet before stacking the pipe with the others on the table. As though fine-tuning the arrangement of furniture in their living room, they drag the table a few inches closer to the wooden board. All of the tubes stay in place. Leaving the table, they amble over to the chair, stand behind it, and grab the top of the backrest with both hands. Taking a break to limber up, they pull away from the chair, stretching out their back, then sink lower, ending up in a lunge, stretching their legs. They slide back up to a stand and, once again, tip their torso over the back of the chair into a balance on their belly. This time, they brace their forearms on the seat so that they can stay longer, with their legs pedaling into the air behind them. They're suspended, almost as though caught in a moment of free-falling through space. Without ceremony, they tip themselves back onto their feet and return to the table covered in tiny pipes. Adjusting its position slightly once more before sidling back over onto the wooden board. They tap their toe delicately onto the warped wooden surface, then swing the chair around so it sits facing forward in front of the small platform. Holding onto the chair's back as though it were a ballet bar, they limber up their knees, then swing one foot onto the back of the chair and arch their spine into an indulgent backbend. They let their foot slide down the chair and stretch towards the ground, like they're caught mid-stride with the chair between their legs, somehow at ease despite the awkward position. Before leaving, they round-kick their leg over the chair, as if to emphasize their mastery of the strange world of props they've assembled around them. Turning to the table, they tip it towards them with the aloofness of a cat knocking over a houseplant. The pipes spill onto the board with a dramatic clatter. Unfazed, Jess steps anticlimactically on the copper pipes, nudges them, and rolls them with their feet. Having created chaos, they wander out of the performance area. The metronome remains untouched.
Okay. Super interesting stuff there. We got Meichen back, we've got Whitney back. And I know that the next video we're going to see is a response to this video. It's a shorter video. And then we're going to have Jess actually come and chat with us about this particular performance, the call and response bit, which is why we're playing the response before we speak with Jess. So anything we want to do to set up the response?
Well, I just get chills with Jess's performance, particularly.
I have so many questions, so I can't wait for Jess to join us in the space.
I just want to say for the response that it was, as is set up, it's done improvisationally. So really, B was very present in witnessing and absorbing what Jess was doing, while also thinking through his own practice and his own connections to space, time, home, and his intentions for being there. So I really do think that there's a wonderful vibration between the two in the piece. That's what I'll say for the setup.
Yeah. All right. That's great. Rick, will you go ahead, please, and play The Response by B. Solomon?
The following is a description of an unedited archival video of a 5-minute performance by B. Solomon. This solo is an improvised response to a solo by Jess, which can be found elsewhere on this site. These solos and this experimental process of live artistic response were instigated by Arts Assembly as a part of their The Longest Way Round is the Shortest Way Home series, which took place in the late summer of 2021. B. Solomon performs this response in Lisgar Park in Toronto, which is a wide-open concrete plaza. He is a light-skinned, mixed Anishinaabe artist who describes himself as shaped by the land he was born on, between Lake Huron and Lake Superior. He is tall, with long brown hair worn in a messy bun. For this solo, he wears an all-black outfit. His sleeveless top has large armholes so that much of his torso is visible. He also wears a black ball cap with colorful flowers embellishing the front panel. For this response, he performs to a recording of a man's voice. Sometimes when the voice speaks, B lip syncs, moving his mouth so it appears as though it were him who was talking. As he lip syncs, he often dramatizes the words with emphatic, passionate arm gestures. B performs this response in the immediate aftermath of Jess's solo. This means that there are small copper pipes lying on the ground, around and between Jess's small wooden board and small metal table. Jess's metronome still sits in front of the table, untouched, and their gray storage box lies on the cement as well. The only thing that has been moved is Jess's folding chair, which now sits between two small trees in the front corner of the performance space. Thank you for listening to this introduction, and enjoy the performance. B starts his solo by raising one arm high in front of the chair, listening to the speaking voice.
Has no center to it.
Go where, grandfather?
To the mount. To the top.
B watches his fingertips as they descend towards the chair. He grabs onto it firmly, first with one hand, and then the other. With great effort, he lifts it from the ground. It's as though the chair has been in that exact place for years, and he has to pull it up by its roots. He hoists the chair onto his shoulder and treads carefully towards the wooden board where Jess's copper pipes are still strewn about. He moves with measured, plodding steps, his eyes focused on the ground, almost as though he's trudging through snow. When he reaches the board, he begins to jig somberly, his eyes still cast down towards his feet, the chair still propped up on one shoulder. He lightly kicks the copper pipes as he dances. He plunks the chair down next to the table, then flings open his arms and begins to lip sync.
It is a good day to die.
He sends his eyes to the sky, scanning the environment.
Thank you for making me a human being.
He falls to his knees.
Thank you for helping me to become a warrior.
Earnestly, he flexes his biceps.
Thank you for my victories and for my defeats.
He struggles to a stand. He lifts the metronome onto the table.
And the blindness in which I
He continues to mouth along to the recording as he turns his back to the audience.
You make all things and direct them in their ways, O grandfather. And now,
he opens his arms to the sky.
Human beings
His hand quivers as it traces a long path over the horizon.
that leads nowhere.
B peers at the audience with unflinching intensity before plodding around the table like an old man, hunched over with stiff, creaking steps, kicking a few copper pipes gruffly out of his way as he goes. His eyes fix on the mechanical metronome that stands alone on the small table.
I am going to die now. Unless death wants to fight. And I ask you for the last time to grant me my old power.
He releases the arm of the metronome, then staggers into his chair. The metronome stops ticking on its own. He heaves his feet onto the table like he's settling in for a nap. The brim of his hat is low and covers his eyes.
Take care of my son here. See that he doesn't go crazy.
He crosses his arms in an X over his chest, like someone laid to rest, and slowly leans his head back, revealing his closed eyes under the dark brim of his floral ball cap. He lies still, looking peaceful. Around him, the plaza is quiet, somber, suspended in time. A pigeon wanders through the background. B stays still, not lip-syncing, as a new voice calls out to him.
Grandfather?
He stirs, frowning slightly as he reluctantly lifts his head. He keeps his eyes closed as he lip-syncs again.
Am I still in this world? Yes.
Weary, he throws his hat down in the box beside him with a thud.
I was afraid of it.
He stomps his feet down from the table and stands, the markers of age and effort melting from his body. A smile breaks on his face as he bows graciously.
Okay, that was the response from B. Solomon. I want to invite Jess into the space, and the four of us can have a little chit chat. So I see Jess. There's Jess. Welcome, Jess, into the space. So, I mean, I have a ton of questions, but first I want to talk about what inspired you about this piece, because were they improv? They were all improv, weren't they? But there's like lots of elements, like lots of proppy stuff that you have, and so I'm curious as to why.
Maybe either Whitney or Meichen can respond to the setup. I also might just need a minute. It was really emotional to watch.
Oh,
sorry.
Is this the first time you've revisited it, Jess?
Yeah, and also with the fantastically funny visuals. I was laughing along because it's somebody else adding art to your art, you know. And that's so right. And also deep love for B. Solomon. And so and we chatted earlier today. They can't be here tonight, but anyways, if Meichen or Whitney, if you want to respond to the setup, so maybe people understand a little bit better to the degree to which things were both planned and unplanned from all of us, to the degree that they can be in public space. And then right. I'll just take a minute. Sorry.
Lovely. No problem.
It's Whitney here. I can add a little bit of context. So part of what we were aiming for, or what we had hoped to kind of facilitate, was, yes, some improvisation, and that is definitely an element that all of the performers that we invited to the project just have as a part of their practice, so that didn't feel like a stretch. But we also wanted it to feel like a conversation. And so leading up to the performances themselves, the dancers got to spend time together. They got to spend time at the park, both in Vancouver and Toronto, and, you know, spend time getting to know not just each other, if they didn't already, but each other's practices and how they approach movement in a space. So that was kind of a lot of the leading up to it, is we wanted to really feel like maybe a two-part duet in kind of a way, is that there was more, exactly how we've described it, a call and response, and not just kind of pulled out of thin air, that there was some kind of premeditated choreography, but that was more what's kind of the word? There was more of like a psychic connection than a choreographed movement connection, so that the dancers had a way to refer to each other in their performances, but then the movements themselves would be open to interpretation when it actually happened. We weren't expecting folks to have, like, you know, it's going to be exactly this long. That was one variable that we didn't necessarily know. We're like, keep it under this length of time if you can. But there wasn't going to be, you know, it's going to be this long, and I know I'm going to be standing here. So we left that a lot up to interpretation, but there was some like conversations and movement exploration between the dancers leading up to it. Yeah.
Thank you, Whitney, for giving that, and also giving me a minute and reminding me of that time. So just here, they them, just as a reminder, and I'm sitting in my bed where I'm often with my back my gratuitous back pillows. Yeah, so a lot of what this project, one of the favorites of my practice, integrated dance into my. So I've worked predominantly individual arts as a sculptor, and so adding dance into my practice has been sort of a humble thing that has felt like a coming out. I appreciated very much the conversation that the three of you had leading into this around, I guess, like classical training and prestige. And I thought the person that did visual descriptions for me did a fantastic job at cluing into nods to technique. But the ways in which we ascribe that kind of classical training onto some bodies and not others, and the way both Whitney and Meichen set up this program and was very relational, and so in the process, and it's Whitney, it's just so funny that you said psychic, because I used that word with over DM today with B Solomon, because they were like, "I'm so sorry I can't be there," and then we just joked about the copper, because in the segment previous to that, B had no idea that I brought that box of copper, and then when tech was failing us, went on a long story about like copper mining in Ontario, and I was like, "Oh no." And now I have to get up and dump a box of copper and bring them out. But it was an incredible tether, and another thing that we bonded over, the four of us, was having proximity to classical training, but being in many ways like outsiders to that. And we coped with it by like doing like a site visit at Lisgar and shouting names of national ballet dancer, like what do you call it? The national ballet, like when they're like primary dancers, is that what we call them? Anyway,
Principal dancers.
There you go. Principal dances. So I again with B and I was like, we just started shouting Rex Harrington loudly in the park, and it was a lot of fun, but it was like very much to what you're speaking to, Whitney. It created a tether that allowed for this. I don't know if improv is even the right word. I feel like it kind of generated a tether where I think I showed up every weekend that we performed, knowing I would just know what to do at what time. And so things like props and then musical accompaniment just became cues to know how much time had gone by, or how I could possibly engage with people that were passing through, because for folks who are not familiar with Toronto, that is a very passing through area. It's a really funny area. It's all concrete hardtop, and then there's condos on every side. And it is very accessible, but it's a very indiscernible space at the same time. It's almost like you really don't know what to do with your body in a space like that. It still does reflect commerce and gentrification. It's not necessarily what I would associate with home, despite the fact that it only takes me 15 minutes to walk there with all my props. But yeah, does that help answer a little bit of the
yeah, Jess, I think that's great. I guess one of the things that we've talked about this a lot in this space about various dance videos, and that some people would say, well, what you did isn't dance, right? So we're kind of deconstructing the idea of what dance is and who dance is for. Because maybe the word dance in as itself seems, I don't want to say problematic, but like with air quotes, right? Like, because it sets up something in your mind of what you expect to witness. Which you all are like flipping the script on, which I think is great. So is there something, Jess, that you can share with us in terms of like what inspired this particular piece? Was there something you were thinking about or feeling in those moments that led you to do the things you did?
Yeah, I think we had a lot of great conversations, as Meichen shared beautifully, around the topic of home, which, like, for many of us in community, and I've so loved being welcomed. Like, I'm gonna just take a minute and say thank you so much for welcoming me and friends that I've invited tonight into your space, because it really does feel like community. And I appreciate, I don't know, whenever deaf, disabled, and blind folks get together, we all just shop talk like about our latest tune-ups and like dental work and hospital stuff. It's fantastic, and it's really welcoming. So thank you. But yeah, I think about space a lot, and in the process of this curation that Whit and Meichen took on during the early times of the pandemic, when things were still pretty indiscernible in the arts, especially in the dance field. A lot of the trust to kind of have a back and forth about this stuff. Personally, I've been going through, luckily it's put off for a year or two now, but like an eviction from my home of 10 years. And this is now rampant across probably not just Canada, but like how the way housing and the idea of home and place. And it was so fantastic to get to integrate real life into, I don't know, because I feel like disability does this a lot. Like we can't help but be like, coarse in the way our lives bleed into how we gather and how we present art, right? But sometimes it's hard when the art world can be a little abrasive in how it's like, no, but why isn't it sleek? Why isn't it together? Why isn't it like already a finished idea? And so it was a fantastic project in that regard to get to be a part of. And so I decided that there was enough trust built between the four of us dancers in the project, and then the curators who did the tireless work of the dance of permits with cities and and bureaucracy. And I'm sure I can tell you all about that. It's nonsense, but to allow us the space to kind of tease stuff out at a time. This was in September of 2021, and so if folks can remember in their bodies what that time felt like, I still can. And it was the season was still warm here in Toronto, but there was still so much of a flux, and we were still wading through the beginnings, I think, of PTSD, of like that isolation, especially when you're a dancer in a practice that relies on, a call and response. So yeah, I feel like it was an ambitious project to push through, I guess, in a time. But I also respected so much. One thing I wanted to make sure I didn't forget to say, I respected so much the ability to create a space. And I'm new to VocalEye, and I'd love to know more about you guys. Like the ability to create space for feedback around access as an ongoing conversation, and not as like a criticism. And because sometimes people hear feedback and it's like, oh, you're calling me out, you're saying I'm not doing it perfectly, and as opposed to like, let's just continue to kind of amend and make things as most comfortable as we can, And as a dancer myself, like I find that to be super inspiring into how practices unfold. And I think that's why these two pieces that you decided to pick, which is kind of incredible. Yeah, as one of the people in them, were one of the most inspiring for me in my career, because I felt the most myself and the most intuitive with being in that moment. Like it was a genuine tether, and we were genuinely feeling each other. And to see them respond to the copper on the ground with their own like background, and like to make the copper jingle like that was like, I don't know, it just, when your heart soars in art, you make art and it just all kind of just falls into place, and you don't plan it, but it's because you center relationality. I'll just leave it on that note. It was super special, and it had disability justice at its core. It had land sovereignty at its core, and yeah, so
it was interesting.
Sorry, I'm having a lot of feelings.
That's totally cool, Jess. We love people that have feelings in this space. It's awesome. It was interesting to me that the metronome was something that you never touched, but then B touched it. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because just about everything that you touched, he touched. Just about, with the exception of the metronome, which you didn't touch, and he did.
That's so interesting that you picked up on that.
Well, because the description kept saying the metronome is untouched. So, like, it tells me that there's a significance to that, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't have been mentioned.
Yeah, so I'm of German heritage. I'm first generation, and we immigrated after the war. And my parents divorced when I was 15. My dad's side is German, but it was a random object I associated with my childhood that somehow ended up in my possession, because I cling on to objects. And so I both love that object and also am afraid of it possibly sometimes. And so it's interesting that you're making that observation. I'm like, wow, did I just unconsciously not touch it during that full time? Like, and then B was just like, ooh, toy. You know what I mean? And yeah.
What was it like to, because I understand these pieces happened back to back. What was it like to witness what B's response to your work?
Oh, it was incredible. B is so funny. The comedic I have a really loud laugh, so I found myself just like this a lot.
With your hands in front of your face, yeah.
Yeah, because I'm partially deaf, so I can't always tell how loud I am. And then the same day, they also did a response with Dana Rosales, and then they decided to crank me and yell Rex Harrington, and I nearly threw my coffee on the ground. So my relationship with B is very I think connected through joking and teasing and humor, and which is connected, I think, to what and you shared about a response to the category of what we associate with classical bands, right? Yeah. So yeah.
I would love to know what your response was, because you started off by saying that the audio description made you laugh.
Oh yeah.
What was your? I mean, I'd love to hear the response, because for me, it's really evocative. I mean, with the two pieces, how many times Andrea comes up with a word other than walk, strut, stride, lumber, amble, so many different words that are like, oh, that I could just marinate in all those different textures of words. What did it feel like to you to experience that?
They did a fantastic job. I think where I started laughing and I couldn't stop was when they called me a cat.
When I was playing with the pipe like a cat. Yeah.
And I was like, well, you're not wrong. And then I was like, well, wait, why was I doing that?
It's interesting because this is where we ask our especially in dance context, right, where we ask our describers to be just a tad subjective, right? Because they can tell us that you just pushed at a pipe, but it just doesn't have the same kind of ooh, that's interesting.
And I'll get less goofy for a minute. So I think part of the reason I shared about my laughter is that moments of joy when I found them in art are always super meaningful to me. And sometimes in a Canadian context, which is super colonial, that joy is super dismissed and written off. And so we're not meant to honor that as art. But for me, often my moments of joy where I literally let out a giggle, because an exchange with a person either I know or I don't know, often I don't know, and I'm meeting for the first time, is significant. We've just connected across a thing, and their response to something is beautiful. And so I giggled in that way, and it's not to dismiss it. I think I appreciate Andrea's subjectivity in the way that well gosh, here's a new relationship. And I, having studied literature and not even art at all, I appreciate notions of translation not as an attempt to capture something completely, because I think that's kind of a fallacy, but to kind of just transplant again and again in other language and in other subjectivities. I find it beautiful, and I was laughing because I was getting to know someone through just they're witnessing, which I think is fantastic, inherently disabled. And I think the art ecology of Canada can use a fuck ton more of that. Am I allowed to swear? Anyway, it was like I was just cry laughing because I was like, oh my god, who is this person? Can we have coffee? Like, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Can we have coffee? Yeah. I love it. Next time I'm in Toronto.
No, totally.
Thank you, Jess, for sharing your artistry with us. I think it's a really beautiful piece, and I was really happy to see or witness the call and response, because they go really nicely together. Folks in our audience, if you didn't recognize the audio from B. Solomon's response, I knew it right away. It's from Little Big Man, the movie Little Big Man. And somehow that was, we were talking about this before we hit record tonight, but somehow that is a movie that I grew up with. I don't even know why, but I watched it many times as a child. And so it was really recognizable to me. So I think B. Solomon is certainly making a statement by using that piece, which I very much appreciate.
Could I say one? You
absolutely can. Yeah.
Okay. So one last thing. I appreciated you giving a nod to Black History Month. To give another movie recommendation that I didn't expect on Netflix right now is The United States versus Billie Holiday, and I'm a fan of Billie Holiday's music. I frankly was a little shocked to understand that I didn't know it as much as I thought I did about her history. The film is fantastic. It stars Audra Day, who I know musically, but I think it might be her first stab at acting. But I think it relates to our conversations tonight, because the trajectory of the film really outlines the ways in which public policy gets manipulated to, and uses the arts to do that. And I had no idea just how policed her body got by just the song Strange Fruit. And I think for folks looking for something that ties in art, politics, Blackness and feminist, it was pretty fantastic, and I thought Audra Day did a fantastic job. So another really recommendation.
Wonderful, thank you for that. Yeah. We're always looking for recommendations in this space. Really appreciate that, Jess. All right, friends, thank you, Jess. I know you're going to come back and join us for the Q&A, so sit back and be comfy and enjoy the rest of our offerings this evening. And Meichen and Whitney, what are we going to witness next?
Whitney, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, so I am so excited to be able to share this work by Sarah Wong. I think being able to do just this part of the project in Vancouver as well as Toronto, I know kind of selfishly for Meichen and I, it was a really nice way to tether our two cities, which we'd been longing to do for a long time since Meichen trudged back across the country. And it really gave us a way to anchor these ideas that we were ruminating about into, not just a performance that happened to happen in two cities, but performances that really were grounded in the places that they happened and with the people that performed them. And so getting to work with Sarah was just, I could gush forever about working with Sarah. It was such a dream. Her work is just so beautiful, and it really brought community into performance for me. Like, I saw so much of not just her and her love for dance and her love for sharing her dance, but just really making that extra layer accessible in so many ways. It was just so beautiful, and just a chef's kiss. I loved it. So the work that we're going to be sharing is from her solo piece that happened in Tatlow Park in Vancouver. And then it was melded and immediately followed by a response from Marisa Gold.
Okay. And just before we play this, I'll tell you that the video is just over 20 minutes long, because it's the call and response in one video. and they're sort of edited together. Even though Andrea says this is I think this is like a 10-minute dance piece, we're gonna play them back to back, so we won't be coming back to chat in between these two. So just so folks know, it is about 22 minutes long. Okay. I'm excited to witness this. So let's have Rick hit play.
The following is a description of an unedited archival video of a 10-minute dance solo called Everything, Everything, created and performed by Sarah Wong. This solo was commissioned by Arts Assembly as a part of their The Longest Way Round is the Shortest Way Home series, which took place in the late summer of 2021. As a part of this series, another dance artist, Marisa Gold, was invited to respond spontaneously to Sarah's performance. In this recording, Sarah's solo transitions seamlessly into Marisa's improvised response, which is about 10 minutes long. Sarah is a second-generation Chinese immigrant. She has dyed dark pink hair with black roots cut into a blunt bob. For this solo, she wears a matching pink outfit, comfortable and cozy, like children's pajamas. Marisa, who dances the response, is a light-skinned black woman with natural hair worn in an afro. She wears a bulky white sweater and loose beige pants. The dances take place in Tatlow Park in Vancouver on a slightly chilly, overcast day. The grass where they dance is damp and a little muddy from a recent rain. For Sarah's solo, the center of the performance area is set with a twin-sized duvet stretched over the grass like a picnic blanket. A couple of paces behind it, a small blue suitcase sits up on its end. Thank you for listening to this introduction and enjoy the dances. Sarah's solo begins with a recording she made of herself and her siblings talking to her grandmother about food. It's a lo-fi recording that is at times difficult to hear, and it lasts for about 2 minutes. While it plays, Sarah lies on her back at one end of the blanket and listens.
Especially go anywhere, just, you know, if you buy anything, then you buy some for me. So I always have joke.
They're broke for joke right now.
Yeah, joke, you know, congee.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and then they'll jump away. You know why they'll jump away?
What's that again?
Oh, that's what that's called?
So good.
What is it?
The Chinese
donut.
Oh, that's my favorite.
2 instead of 1.
Uh-huh. Because they're not sweet.
Yeah, they're good.
They always buy me something. Then I always, before they come back, they phone me. I always ask how much. Then I take the money back there. You know, I get the way amount I go down there to them. And they give me the food, I give them the money. You know, you don't talk to each other too much now, right? So you put it all and I can give them the money, they give me the food.
It's like your personal delivery, personal takeout.
Sarah is still lying on her back. She reaches across her body and squeezes the edge of her blanket with her hand. It is soft and spongy, not too thin and not too thick for Sarah to easily grab a luxurious handful between her fingers and palm. Her other hand reaches to feel and grab the edge of the blanket down by her knees. Both of her hands stay active with the work of sensing and holding. She pulls up the edge and rolls into the blanket, which swallows her up like a cresting wave. She keeps rolling, slowly, softly, until she is cocooned completely. Everything but her black hair and black shoes, which peek out at either end. In this blanket, she is embraced, encased, contained, protected. like a game she used to play with her brother, where they would roll each other up like sushi, like a game I used to play with my mum, where she would do the same thing and call me a sausage roll. It's comforting, safe, and a little bit silly. On her belly, she arcs her head and feet off the ground, towards each other, her whole body bowed like the base of a rocking horse. Relaxing back down to the ground, she wriggles and bends inside the cocoon. Her human form obscured, she's a larva. She's incubating. She curls up and stretches sensuously, subtle changes of shape within her soft container. Easy, gentle metamorphosis. She stretches her neck, and her face, serene, emerges from one end before she closes her eyes and ducks back into the comfort of the blanket. Suddenly, she rolls along the damp ground in her cocoon. The blanket begins to get dirty, wet, and grass-stained, its fibers already holding evidence of the history of this performance, of what has come before. She log rolls back and forth in the blanket, building speed, getting more playful. An arm reaches up, bursts out of the cocoon, growing. Her other hand pops out. Both palms press into the grass. She moves through a crawl, to a crouch, to a stand, while she turns slowly around herself. As she rises, the blanket falls, off her shoulders, down her waist, until it is twisted and bunched around her shins, like a container that she grows from, and she is a potted plant, dressed in pink pajamas. Her feet held together by the blanket, she sways, twists, wraps her arms tenderly around herself like tendrils. Grabbing an edge of the blanket with one hand, she steps out of the makeshift container and lets it disintegrate as she drags the blanket behind her over one shoulder. Her eyes stay fixed on the blanket as she moves, observing its weight, how it bunches up, curves behind and around her as she walks in a circle. She whirls the blanket in low loops over the ground, like a lasso. She hoists it back up over her shoulder as she paces, thoughtful, measured steps, plotting out a small circle. She pulls the corner of the blanket across her torso like a seatbelt, like a sash, and holds it closely to her breast, like cradling a tiny loved one. She changes direction sharply and watches the tail of the blanket swing out in response. With her chin, she pins the blanket in place against her collarbone. This frees up her arms, which she lifts out to the sides, like an airplane. She spins and changes speeds, all while watching the blanket flare out behind her. It's simple, childish, tender, fun. She opens the blanket and swings it around her shoulders. All of a sudden, it's the cape of a queen. Sarah poses regally, then shifts. She's high fashion. She shifts again and poses like a pouty princess. She smiles at the audience as she drops from character and becomes busy with preparing another look. This time, she wraps the blanket under her arms to make a tube dress with a train that pools behind her. She strikes a pose, beauty queen, shifts, puts one hand on her hip and shows big attitude. She shifts again to become an aloof model. Again, she smiles genuinely as she drops the facade, folds the blanket in half, and refashions it into a long skirt wrapped around her waist. Her first pose shows glamour, her second, elegance, and her third, coy flirtation. The pattern repeats. She gathers up the blanket and wears it as the world's biggest, bulkiest scarf, wrapped around her shoulders. Again, she strikes a series of playful poses. Like a child playing dress-up, she tries on different personas, toying with postures of power, glamour, and confidence. Time and tone change. Her head becomes heavy and slowly bows forward, disappearing into the mass of blanket as she curls inward until she is crouching, holding her swaddled head down by her knees. Her face emerges slowly, like coming up for air. She looks ahead and then dips back down, folding over completely. Balling up the blanket in her arms, it transforms into her dance partner. She lovingly carries it up and over her head and gently passes it around behind her back. It reminds me of one of the ways I play with my young nephew, delighting him by shifting him around my body, letting him experience the thrills of moving upside down and backwards, while I take extra care to make sure he feels safe. Sarah's dance becomes bigger and more abstract. The blanket has its own weight and momentum and moves with a smooth trajectory around and around Sarah, an act of continuous encircling, like the blanket is on a roller coaster ride all around her. Sometimes the blanket falls open and covers Sarah's head, but she always regathers it and keeps going without too much disruption to its circuitous path. Her movements are elegant, but the fact that the blanket is so much bigger than her and so bulky keeps it from ever looking too polished and imbues the dance with a feeling of candidness and vulnerability. Gradually, Sarah lets the blanket open up more and more as she swirls it around her, billowing wide like a cape in the wind. Eventually, she tosses it to open it all the way and spreads it over the grass like a picnic blanket. She crawls over the blanket and adjusts its edges to make sure it lays flat. Once satisfied, she leaves the blanket and walks confidently towards Marisa, who has been sitting, watching in the audience. Sarah smiles and asks her in a voice that's barely audible, "Do you want to come have a picnic with me?" Marisa follows her to the blanket. Sarah retrieves her small blue suitcase from its place on the grass and gestures to Marisa to take a seat. Sarah slides off her runners at the blanket's edge, while Marisa settles in across from her and begins to unlace her black boots. Opening the suitcase and smiling at Marisa, Sarah begins to unpack. She pulls out 2 small stuffed animals and introduces them to Marisa. She sits the animals down on the blanket as though they too are guests at the picnic. By coincidence, Marisa ends up sitting on the blanket with her back directly to the camera, and Sarah is setting up the picnic right in front of Marisa, so it's impossible to really see what's going on. They're also occasionally talking and laughing with each other, but their words aren't audible. Therefore, the description for the following section draws on my memory of seeing the performance live from a different angle with an unobstructed view, as well as the notes I took at the time and some notes given to me since from Sarah. Sarah's setup is quite elaborate and very well thought out, complete with plates, chopsticks, and even hand sanitizer for herself and her guest. She has a large paper box from Newtown, a beloved dim sum spot located across the city in Vancouver's Chinatown, and serves both Marisa and her 2 stuffed animal guests a wide assortment of treats. It takes quite a while for Sarah to set everything up, and as she does, she lets Marisa know a little bit about the food. There is coconut bun, wiener bun, char siu bao, which is a steamed barbecue pork bun, har gao, which is a shrimp dumpling, lo mai gai, which is sticky rice wrapped in lotus leaf, and yo za gui, which is a Chinese donut. Marisa is extremely appreciative and makes an effort to really savor and enjoy the food, closing her eyes to focus intently on its taste. She also expresses her pleasure and thanks in words. As the song winds down, Sarah begins to eat as well, appearing content, first having shared her dance, and now sharing her food with Marisa. Sarah and Marisa continue to eat and laugh together. For me, it feels a little strange to watch them eat. The dancers enjoy the dim sum and chat as though they are not performing, but the audience continues to give them their quiet attention as the picnic unfolds in an intentionally unspectacular fashion on the grass before them. Marisa tips her head back with pleasure and grooves with her spine, swaying from side to side, doing a little happy dance. The food must be truly delicious. From my perspective, there's a pointed sense of awkwardness. Sarah is no longer dancing and her solo feels over, but at the same time, this picnic doesn't feel like an ending, and no applause has been given. The two dancers and the audience are suspended together in this in-between space, left to meditate on the simple yet powerful act of sharing food. Sarah holds up a piece of bun to Marisa, like she's saying cheers. Marisa nods and looks around, then up at the sky, and points something out to Sarah. They keep eating quietly with their chopsticks, sampling all the different things. There's uncertainty about what will happen next. Finally, Marisa dusts her hands off over the grass, rolls back her shoulders, and stretches. She reaches out to the sides and slowly raises her hands towards the sky, rubbing the fingertips of each hand together, like she's waking up and wants to activate her sense of touch. She lets her hands descend the same way they rose, her fingers curling and uncurling in waves at the end of her outstretched arms. Eventually, she bends at the elbow and brings her enlivened hands to meet her belly. Still sitting in her place on the picnic blanket with her back to the camera, the churning of her shoulder blades evident through her thick white sweater hints at the rubbing movement of her hands over her stomach. She looks down at the blanket to her left, then lays softly on her side, cozy and contented, her belly full. She crosses her bare feet over each other and relaxes, exchanging a few more words with Sarah before lounging onto her back and laying a long arm out over the grass. As if changing her mind, she returns to lay on her side, this time tucking her arms under her head like a cradle. Meanwhile, Sarah sits casually, eating more dim sum as she watches Marisa slowly transition into her danced response. Marisa twists open again, her body draping luxuriously over the blanket, an arm spilling onto the grass. She flips her hand over so her palm can brush across the damp terrain as she circles her arm down and back towards her body, catching the edge of the blanket along the way, squeezing it briefly before letting it go, and repositioning herself to lay on her other side. She settles in with her back to Sarah, head resting on her forearm, looking comfortable enough to take a nap. Suddenly, her feet shoot away from her sideways body, into the air like antennae. Slowly, her knees float back down to rest on the blanket. Slowly, her knees float back down to rest on the blanket, her movements like an animal dreaming. A leg shoots out again, and this time reaches and rotates towards the ground while she pushes her body up to a kneeling position. Back at her starting place, she leans over her plate and uses her chopsticks to deliver a dumpling into her mouth. Chewing mindfully, she sets the chopsticks down and, still chewing, stretches up to the sky, eyes closed with pleasure, fingertips rubbing against each other. Crossing her arms over her chest, she embraces herself, massaging her upper arms and shoulders, a little bit like she's trying to keep warm. She looks to Sarah, and they exchange smiles. Rising up on her knees, Marisa unfolds her hands towards the ground and then gathers them back into her heart, lowering back down as she does so. She repeats the gesture, like spilling and collecting, as she shuffles forwards along the edge of the blanket. Arriving at the corner of the blanket, she continues to rise and fall on her knees, allowing her spine to undulate as she pulls her hands back and forth between her heart and the ground. She rises to her knees once again, this time opening her arms wide and tilting her face up to the sky. Her shoulders oscillate, rocking her body gently back and forth as she receives energy from above. Dropping from this rising and lowering, she moves to sit casually on the edge of the blanket with her legs long in front of her. She grabs one of Sarah's stuffed animals, a grapefruit-sized penguin, and sets it up to sit between her knees. She manipulates its feet in synchronization with the movements of her own toes, which cross and uncross in front of her. The penguin hops from her knees onto her head, Marisa gathers her soft, kinky hair around it, as if making a nest. She turns to Sarah, who immediately responds by balancing a teddy bear on her own head. It stays there easily, as Sarah takes a bite of steamed bun. Meanwhile, Marisa holds the penguin on her head as she shifts to sit on a different corner of the blanket. She continues to tenderly work her pillowy hair into a cozy nest for the little bird, sweetly bringing a finger to her lips and telling the audience, "Shh, he's sleeping." The hand that's not holding on to the sleeping bird massages soothing circles over her own heart. She bows her head forward, allowing the bird to slip from its nest and land in her hands. She hugs it tightly to her chest before balancing it back in its place on the blanket. For the first time since arriving at Sarah's picnic, Marisa rises slowly from a crouch and stands. With carefully articulated heel-toe steps of her bare feet, she begins to plot a path along the edge of the blanket, taking extra care as she navigates first around Sarah's small suitcase and then around Sarah herself, who leans forward slightly to help make way for Marisa. As Marisa completes her first circumnavigation of the blanket, her walking pattern builds in complexity. Her pace changes rhythm, builds speed, and she rotates, taking steps sideways and backwards as she makes another lap around the perimeter. On the next lap, she cascades to the ground, landing softly stretched out to her side before easily gathering her legs towards her hands, picking herself up with a light hop, and continuing on her way. Finally, she leaps lightly over the spread of treats and takes a seat in her original spot on the picnic blanket. Immediately, she picks up her chopsticks and helps herself to another bite of food. This time, she keeps the chopsticks poised in her right hand while she chews, dancing her digestion. The chopsticks extend her reach as she lengthens her arm up over her head and stretches it towards the trees on the perimeter of the park. She begins to trace a path with the chopsticks, down past her mouth, along towards her belly, and back out to the trees, creating a loop that she repeats over and over. Her other hand joins, tracing the same path in opposition, cycling inwards like winding a spool of thread, gathering, finding nourishment in her surroundings. Her spine joins the indulgent dance, her head tips back, eyes closed, face blissful. She settles back into her spot on the picnic blanket and lets her body rest. She turns to face the anchoring presence of Sarah, her witness. They smile at each other and exchange words of thanks, gesture jokingly to their collaborators, the stuffed animals, before turning to the audience and receiving their shared applause.
Okay, we're back after that, and we're going to welcome Sarah into the space. So we'll get Sarah. Welcome, Sarah. How are you this evening?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me here.
No problem. Is there any way you'd like to introduce yourself to our audience before we dive deep into conversation?
Yeah, sure. I'm Sarah. I use she, her pronouns. I'm tuning in from unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories, which is colonially known as Vancouver. I'm queer. I'm Chinese. I also identify as disabled with various chronic illnesses. And yeah, being disabled is something relatively new to me, and something I don't have a lot of community around personally. And so I just wanted to say it means a lot to be invited into this space and have a lot of admiration for the community and space that you've created here. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for that. One of the things that I talk about in some of the trainings that I do is that disability is sort of like the one club you can become a member of at any time in your experience of life, right? So thank you for sharing your lived experience with us. I appreciate that very much. Let's talk about you as an artist. Obviously, in this piece, you're doing movement and dance. Do you have training, or were you one of the folks that has like disembarked from training, or what was your background in dance?
Yeah, going back to the conversation the three of you had at the beginning about dance and all the hierarchies that exist within that. Yeah, I had classical training. I went through ballet school and also did a lot of contemporary dance, but was very much derived from ballet. And yeah, although I did have that training, I never really felt accepted and witnessed in that space because, especially being Chinese, I always knew that I wasn't the ideal body that they were looking for. And so I spent a lot of years kind of feeling out of place, but trying really hard to fit into the mold. And my practice as a professional has been very much doing everything I can to step away from what I experienced in my training. And yeah, I would say as a professional, I work mostly in improvisation and score-based movement practice. But actually these days I don't really dance that much anymore, partly because of changes in ability and capacity, but also changes in interest as well. So I usually call myself a general artist person because I do kind of a bit of everything. I'm a writer and I also do visual art as well. So yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, cool. Can we talk a little bit about the piece that we just witnessed together? Because you've got this lovely quilt. It's not a quilt, it's a duvet. A duvet, I guess. A quilt. What a quilt is knitted. A duvet is got stuffing in it, right? Am I getting that right? There's so many nuances to bedding that I don't know how to describe it. But so you're dancing with this object, you're moving with this object. What's the significance of the object for you? Because it seems like a rather unusual thing to pick.
Yeah, I guess it is unusual. So the duvet is actually my childhood room duvet. So it's from my little twin size bed at my parents' house. And yeah, when I was thinking about the idea of home, I was thinking about my experience of being born and raised in so-called Vancouver, and this kind of like weirdness of being an adult and living in the same place where I grew up. And this kind of like, yeah, weird feeling of like, it's so comfortable to be in Vancouver. And at the same time, there's so many memories that it's like really overwhelming also to kind of encounter so much history in my day-to-day life. And so I was playing a lot with like childhood memories. And yeah, as Andrea described in the video, I was kind of rolling myself in the duvet in the beginning, which was a replica of this game that I used to play with my brother when we used to share a bedroom where we would roll ourselves up in the duvet and pretend that we were sushi. And so that was the kind of beginning image that started all my movement research. And then I was like, how many different ways can I use a duvet? Turns out there's a lot of ways. And yeah, I think it kind of acted as like my dancing partner. And yeah, it can be really hard to make a solo because it's like, it's really just yourself a lot of the time. I did have an outside eye, I'll credit my collaborator, Binho, who's a dear friend of mine. But yeah, a lot of the time I was researching on my own. And so my duvet became my little conversational partner.
Where did it the idea of turning the duvet into a picnic blanket and having shared food, was that something that just came to you sort of naturally, or was that something that was, I'm curious about that, because again, I feel like that is not something we expect to see in what we call a dance performance. So I'm curious about that aspect of it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that came from just thinking about my Chinese ancestry, because that's also a big reason why I live in Vancouver. It's because my family is here, my grandma is here, and I did spend 1 year living abroad in Italy when I was still sort of trying to fit into a Eurocentric dancer thing. And living in Italy, which is not a very diverse place, definitely woke me up to, yeah, just the reality of being not a white person. And so a lot of my motivation for moving back to Vancouver was just to like be able to not feel like an alien all the time, and to see my family and to see other people just even walking on the street that look like me. That was yeah, a big part of why I chose to stay in Vancouver. And yeah, I grew up fairly westernized, but food has always been a way that I connected with being Chinese. So that was where the whole picnic idea came from.
And then the sharing of the picnic with Marisa. What was it like? Because we don't have Marisa in the space to talk about the work, but what I asked Jess was what it was like to witness the response to your work. Maybe you can speak a bit about that, and maybe the community aspect of that.
Yeah, for sure. I think what I can remember of the actual performance day is that doing the call and response with Marisa was like one of the most like present performances I've ever felt, because I often find in performance there's so much that I'm thinking of and so much adrenaline that sometimes I'll end a performance and I'm like, I have no idea what just happened. I feel like I just blacked out. But in this show and performing with Marisa, I just remember being like really present in the moment, and being really attentive to each other. And we hadn't worked much with each other before, but our practices intersect in a lot of ways. And I felt a lot of trust in dancing together. And it also kind of helped to like have the food there and be able to just like really chill and like take a step back. Because yeah, I guess like when I think about it, I'm like, yeah, I was still on stage, like I was still there.
Yeah.
But it really didn't feel like that at all, because I was just like eating away and enjoying having a little dance in front of me.
I love that you were holding space for both of you, and for the stuffies.
Yes, the stuffies were very important too.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how those would be reminiscent of home. I probably, if I'm honest with myself, have a big Tupperware container bin full of stuffies somewhere in my house too. I'm curious about, like you just talked about the research, how much prep and research goes into creating a piece like this for you?
Yeah, quite a bit. Yeah, I usually my process usually starts with improvisation, and then gradually, as I figure out what I like and don't like, or what connects to each other, then it starts to take a bit more of a concrete form. But I think it was like probably 3 to 4 months of research, working with, my friend Bin, who is my outside eye. And then another thing was that our performance day was like delayed quite a few weeks because we had a bunch of weather stuff happening. And so it ended up being like quite a few weeks ahead than what we thought. So I had to keep like practicing it as well, because I was like, oh, I don't know when this is going to happen. So yeah, that was another part of it as well.
Where's the blanket now? Because I imagine it's got grass stains on it. Just as like a logistical thing. But did you put it back on your family bed at home, or?
Yeah, I was able to wash all the stains.
Were you? Oh, that's awesome.
Yes, I've slept with it again. It's at my parents'.
That's awesome. Awesome. It remains in a safe place for as long as your parents are there, right? You can visit it any time. Certain amount of comfort in that. Gosh, I wish I had that. Now that I think about my own childhood. So treasure that, Sarah. Treasure it. You might you might miss it when it's gone.
I will.
This is a really, really interesting project, and I wonder for Sarah, for all of you, if you have been able to witness like what, I mean, Meichen and Whitney, obviously we've given space to the artists tonight, but what was it like being the curators of the event, witnessing this work? I'd love to hear from that perspective too, if you'd like to share.
I would. I'm a person that takes a million photographs. I take way, way, way too many photographs. And when
we can call you a photographer then, Meichen, is what you're saying.
I actually have a degree in photography. So maybe this is why I actually have a BFA in photography, but I normally take endless amounts of photos, and I'm so happy I hired a photographer for taking photos, because I actually couldn't. I was there, the call for me in that moment, I had to sit and witness. I couldn't have any mediation between my person and what was happening in front of me. And it's really rare that happens. And it's really rare that I don't interface with something with a lens in between. So that I'm still taken by it. I still cry watching back on these performances, like how Jess was like, I need a moment. I'm like, I always need a moment with thinking about the work. But to be honest, it's also really impacted the trajectory of my own work too. And I owe a huge debt of sorry, it's like 11:30 here. A debt of gratitude for being asked and called to witness, to then think through what I'm bringing into my own material practice, and the ways that I use objects in my sculpture practice, and how I give space for others to bring in their stories to my stories. So
I love that. Whitney, how about for you?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I resonate so much with how Meichen feels about this project. I know for both of us, it was just, we had this idea and we're like, we hope this is like, people are going to be into it, and we hope it makes like, it's good space and it's a good time for the people that are a part of it, that they feel safe, that they feel welcome, to explore and to challenge and just be in conversation and movement with each other. And so to actually hear, what the dancers themselves have got out of it. And like, I feel like I had such a privileged window of looking into all of these works. I mean, the theme around it was around home, but I really did feel like I was being given a front row seat into someone's home, and that feels so intimate, that feels so special. So to see that actually being enacted with such grace and such generosity from all the performers was just like, I feel nothing but gratitude to be able to have been part of it. It feels like we just kind of opened the door and gave the key, and we're like, let us in when you're ready. And not expecting to be you know, to be welcomed back in. Like we did you know, I felt like I was entering someone's home, be like, I will knock, like I don't own this home anymore. And that's exactly how it felt. It was just so warm. And yeah, the way that Sarah talked about, you know, sharing food, I mean, it really broke down any kind of like what's the word I'm trying to look for? It kind of shattered the illusion that what we're watching is performance, and really what we were actually watching was this encounter between friends and an encounter between sharing of practices. And that's what it felt like. I was like, there's no performativity here. This is what's actually happening. And that Sarah got then a front row seat to Marisa's response is just, that's how it happened. And it was just so lovely. So yeah, for me, getting to be a part of it at all is just like, I'm just, thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Jess. Thanks everyone. Because it's just, yeah, it's such a treat.
Well, speaking of Jess, let's see if we can get Jess to join us in this space, and we'll transition into doing a little Q&A with everybody. So if Jess is around and you're ready to turn on your camera, oh, I see a flickering light. I see a flickering light. We're gonna add you to our series of squares. There we are. I think we got 5 squares. Wonderful.
I knew it was an accident to get so horizontal too quickly. I was like, why like this? And I was like, this is great. And you're like, is Jess still here? I was like, no.
I would love to be able to do this job from a horizontal position, but alas, not very accessible for me to do that. But I'm feeling you. I'll ask our audience. This is your opportunity. If you have any questions or comments to Jess or to Sarah, Meichen, or Whitney, you want to talk about the audio description and how that impacted you, your curiosities about the work, this is your time. I already see a hand. I don't even have to wait very long. Okay, let's go to the first hand, and that is Megan. Megan, our friend from the Okanagan. Give Megan a moment to unmute.
Oh, that was amazing. I loved it. I loved it, especially when you were doing the one. I've never listened to Little Big Man, but when I was saying when he was praying to his grandfather, turning to the grandfather of his ancestors, it kind of reminded me of a reading that I read sometime in my Unitarian, but grandfather, look at our brokenness. But also it kind of reminded me how he did it was amazing. It felt like it was calling to something, like calling to an energy, an ancestor energy source, which is awesome. And when we mentioned bad weather in Vancouver, did it mean, was it like the one that was was it mean when it was really, really windy in 2021? When it was really, really windy? Like
that's a question for Sarah.
Wind? I think it was Sarah.
Was it was it wind, Sarah? Was it rain? What was the bad weather that delayed the dance?
Yeah, I think it was the rain.
Yeah, I think we got rained out. Like we'd had it scheduled like one weekend, and it was just the end of August for whatever reason was just unexpectedly rainy that year. And it's a little hard to do a dance in the park if you're being soaked. And it also was not particularly, I mean, I don't know if the duvet, Sarah, would have survived the drenching, but I know for one of our other dancers, Harmony Rose, she uses a wheelchair, and it would not have been safe for her to perform on a very muddy terrain. So we were trying to make it as enjoyable as possible.
Good idea.
Not trying to be like you know, an obstacle course.
Totally fair. Thank you, Megan, for your thoughts and your questions.
You're welcome.
Sean and Christy are next. One of you's next. I know it's going to be Christy.
Hi. It's me. Me and my inquisitive, newly formed artist brain. I had a question about writing that project, like how you structured your proposal for this project, because I'm many things, but right now I'm working with 2 students through Emily Carr, and we're doing our humanities course. I call it Hour because it feels like mine, but we're working on how to write an artist proposal. And I'm just wondering, like, how you, like, I look at the end result and I'm like, how do you propose something like that? Like, what's the structure of that proposal?
Sure, I can
Do you
start.
start with your artist statement, or like?
That's extremely academic.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Mike in here. I'll start with and any folks fill in just from the logistics of it. So the first thing was, like I said, we saw this opportunity, and it was really a chance for us to enact work that we've been mumbling about. Oh, we really want to do this, and then we're like, oh, this is a framework. So we saw the right opportunity. So that's really key, is to be like looking for like, what are these right opportunities? And then Whitney and I collectively started thinking about different folks that we wanted to work with. Amelia, one of the dancers, I've known for a very, very long time. And I was talking to Amelia about the project. They were like, I was talking to Jess about this project. Jess wants to talk to you. And I was like, Jess is amazing. Yes, I want to talk to Jess about this project. And then I was researching through different documentation of performance festivals that have happened in Toronto to expose myself to not just the people in my immediate circle. So as much as I always want to champion those that I know, it's really important to think past what you know when you're programming artists, especially if you're concerned with bringing in voices other than those that are in easy reach, right?
Right.
So that was the first step, was identifying who, and then to ask from each of the artists to give to us a sentence or two about like who they are, so that it comes from their words and it's not us prescribing their practice, as well as their connection to this overall theme. So it started with, from the top was like, here's the big theme. Here's the section, like the section underneath was about, from each of the artists, their connection to it. And then it was the logistics, like why does this matter right now? Why does it matter in this city? Why this mattered in this city, because we did the Toronto proposal first, was Toronto's a really precarious city, and it was really important to bring this conversation into Toronto at that time. And so we went through like, why does this matter? Why does it matter now? And what are we going to do to make this a safe space to have these kind of conversations? So that's like from the pragmatic curatorial space. I see Jess has their hand up. I'd love Jess to bring in some words too.
There's before Jess speaks, there's a lot of grants now have that question about why now? Why is this important? What is this work meant to do? The timing of this work. So that's often something you see in grants around that question. All right, Jess, you have something to add?
Meichen has a lot more expertise in terms of applying on the curatorial side of grants, but I have observed I appreciate this question, and I like to give people really bossy advice in this regard, in terms of like, I think as, new identity groups get acknowledged and become moneyed, like it is great to, if you can, through research or community connections, muster the confidence to just assert yourself and how you apply for grants. And if you need to consult people that have already applied for grants, so be it. But I often lead with aspects of the ways in which I want to push fields, not just around artistic presentation, but like production. And which I think this chat has been so exciting to me for that reason, and so I know it, I don't know, for folks that are maybe newer to applying to grants, which I feel like this question is coming from. It for sure is scary, but like if you can talk to people and help gain that confidence and just assert that you are helping to kind of imagine a thing that could be, it actually does work in your favor with grants. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll get it right away, because I think that's the way these new pathways get carved. But Meichen elucidated a lot. And I think as an independent artist, I would say my experience is similar. It's like the more you can paint with the experience of wanting to not just create, deafblind and disabled art, but like wanting to create a new genre, essentially. Granting officers and juries really respond really well to if you can demonstrate that. So I know it's a scary process if you haven't been through it, but yeah.
Yeah, it's complicated, but you guys, that just makes sense. I like how you laid it out. Thank you. Yeah, I could go on, and I can pick your brains forever, but I'll let somebody else talk.
Also, I just want to offer, Whitney and I are always happy to like meet up for a chat around just like, it's important for us as an organization to like bring forward like any learning. So, like feel free to email us at hello@artsassembly.ca, and we're happy to like have a chat around writing applications. More than happy to.
The kind of offer that some of the biggest barriers, the fact that grant portals are not accessible. They're not accessible.
Keep telling the
they know.
Keep telling them. The more they hear it, and that's something we give feedback on as well. Whenever we fill it out, they're like, how could this have been? How long did it take you? How could this have been better? It's like always question what forms of access you're providing, and don't assume it's enough. And don't assume just because not enough people are telling you it's not enough that you're doing it properly. So I think always.
I think some of the defaults around that have been, oh well, we'll provide $200 for someone to like write your grant for you, and it's like
that's not enough money.
That's not enough money at all. And because I've been through that process where somebody sat down and asked me the questions, and I responded to the questions, and then they helped massage the questions because what I was giving was not necessarily something a jury wanted to hear, right? Because it was my first time doing it a few years back. And that process was very labor intensive. And I thought, well, you get a whole $200 for this? Nah. So there you go. That's sort of the solution to the inaccessibility at the moment.
And doing that in one go is really not doing you any service to the amount of time, the amount of edits and once-overs and brain breaks that Meichen and I take from grant applications. The labor involved in that is insane, but it's also necessary for you to actually fully understand and process what you're trying to say, instead of being like, this is the one chance I have to share it with someone who can help me, and that might not be the most the best way that you want to share what you're talking about. So I really do hope it gets better.
One step at a time. Forward momentum is always what I'm looking for. Meichen and Whitney, you had shared a little bit about the impacts that this project had on you, and I'm curious for Sarah and for Jess if they have any additional impacts that they want to share. I mean, we talked about the work itself, but what's the impact for you all of the project as a whole? Jess, you want to take that one first?
I don't know, as an individual artist, but I can speak to them as well as the curators. But I guess I can say for that space and time, it was pretty incredible. During our weeks of September, one of the things that we improvised, I guess if you can call it a dance, was a baby was born during one of the performances. And so I ended up turning what would have been a 10-minute performance into an hour-long performance in the hot sun.
Wow.
But it was kind of incredible. It was like an intimacy with Amelia, where I knew they were on a train, and I knew they needed to take extra time to greet their new nibbling, and I spent this time on this concrete hardtop with this like centerpiece like possibly 50, 40 abandoned glasses from a bar that closed down in the pandemic that just put all their glassware, beautiful glassware, on the curb. And it was a lot of Toronto was dystopic at that time, you know, and everyone was kind of reaching for community. And I guess like one of the takeaways for me was like moments like that were not as artistic, that were hard to document, but that were curious in their own way, you know what I mean? And like Amelia's absence was a presence, I suppose, and then putting tiny little pieces of 2 broccoli heads in all these individual glasses and tuning all of them with the tuning fork was like, it was such a pleasure and also such an exercise at the same time. But at the same time, it's been such a blessing to like be a part of this event tonight and get to witness Sarah. Oh my gosh, your piece so incredible, and I'm so glad for the like video documentation, because I felt very present in the picnicking and like the feeling. It resonated. It's incredible to get to see video documentation that not only makes you feel there, but like makes you feel connected to the work you did yourself, you know, and like friendship, I guess. I don't want to project onto your experience, but I'd love to hear more of your thoughts about your you know, fellow dancers and residents, because it's the orientation around food and around place, like it resonates, and the calm around what was 2021, which was a lot of heightened stress and body like stress, and yeah. Anyway.
There were different times. Different times, yeah. I don't know, Sarah, if you have a response to that, or if you want to talk about the impact that the project has had as a whole, the impact Sarah's work has had on you tonight, or Jess's work. Sarah to Jess's work.
Yeah, this is Sarah speaking. Yeah, so incredible to watch your performance, Jess, and just the playfulness of it brought me so much joy. And yeah, beautiful to like have the 2 locations of the project come together, since they kind of happened in different times and spaces. So it's really nice to see them coexist. Yeah, I'll say about the impact of the project. I've listened to Andrea's description a few times now, and it makes me super emotional, also because Andrea is a friend of mine. So I think it feels extra special and intimate to like have my work be articulated so poetically and beautifully by a friend. And yeah, language is also like a big part of my practice, and was also something that really connected me and Marisa, because Marisa's an incredibly gifted poet, and I have a writing practice as well. So to have language be part of it is also super meaningful for me. And then also just the archiving part of it. I think a lot about archives in my practice. It's like something that I pull a lot of material from, like the audio recording that happens at the beginning of my solo, of my grandma. I use a lot of things like that, videos, old photos and stuff. And then I also think about the work that I make as a process of archiving my lifetime and, you know, having that as the memories that will be passed on to future generations in my lineage. And the interesting part of this project was that the video itself, I realized when I watched it that it wasn't filmed from like the best angle, which I remember on the day of being like asked, like, is this an okay angle to film it at? And I was like, yeah, totally. Because I think I had an idea of my piece being more like 360 than it actually was. And then I watched it and I was like, oh no, like I definitely had like a specific front. And I should have asked for it to be filmed from there, but that didn't happen. And so to have Andrea's description, it's like actually a much more like accurate document to like what the performance actually was. So I love that that exists for people to enjoy now, but also in the future.
Good description is good for everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It
yeah.
serves the listener and it serves the work, so it's good for everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's also interesting to me because on top of being dancers and movers, you know, both Sarah and Jess, well, Mike and you did as well, talked about different artistic practices. So Sarah, you're a writer and other things, and Jess, you're a sculptor and other things. So I wonder if you want to just share a little bit about, because I'm always curious, you know, usually my question at the end of this is like, what's next? What's next for you all? And whether that's still along a dance or movement path, or whether that's other artistic things that you're going to endeavor towards. So I don't know, Jess, what's next for you? Or current, I suppose.
I think the next question, with all due respect to everyone, and I would love feedback on this, but I think the next question sometimes takes time because I often get ideas like really quickly, and dance and sculpture and poetry vary so well, but sometimes there's something to be said for the ways in which I don't know how to say it politely. Contextualities just need to keep up, and so with this project, I would love to do an experiment. I had a great opportunity in a group show last summer to I was a part of the inaugural residency of intergenerational LGBT folks on the Toronto Islands residency, and they did a group show at Tangled and Disability Arts, and it was fantastic. And I got to experiment with an idea I've had since like 2018 to use prefabricated grab bars, but in like positioned ways differently to the way you would see them sterilely and in bathrooms, and use it as like a dance sculpture, and it was fantastic. But sometimes projects like that take time, and it takes time sometimes for ecologies to catch up, I suppose, and create a space for folks to I'm treading lightly because I'm like, I have big dreams about projects like that, and dance and sculpture as a marriage. But I think, oh gosh, it's also knowing that the pandemic has done a number on a lot of us, right? And so we do need a bit of time to just go slow. And a lot of my practice before the pandemic involved, you know, like dance, gathering, physical touch, and to spend 10 years building that through disability community, and then have COVID be like, no, for safety reasons, you have to stop all of these things. Yeah. It's a necessary stop, but it means to reinvent an entire decade of what you did. as a way of connecting to other people. You're like, yeah, it's work, sure, as well, but yeah, I guess that's my best answer, and I know it's super convoluted. So there are things in the works, but they are also things that are in the works that are mindful of safety over like pushing art before community, I guess. I don't know.
Totally fair.
Yeah.
Totally fair. Sarah, I don't know, do you want to take a piece of that question? Things that you're working on now or planning to work on?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm a student right now at UBC, doing art history, I think. Many question marks.
Yeah.
But yeah, wondering kind of what I'm doing there, having questions around what the value of having a degree is, pushing up against lots of institutional stuff, and yeah, the reality of being a disabled student is not super fun. So that's one thing that I have going on right now. And yeah, that takes up a lot of my time, and I'm realizing how much I miss being a practicing artist because I don't do as much of that anymore. I do have one project that I've kind of been slowly working on with my friend Ileana Chaladin, who's also a dance artist and maker of other things. So we've made this installation called Rock Garden, which is an interactive installation that's 10 handmade pillows that look like rocks because we really like rocks. And it's designed to be a rest space for people because bodies don't get to rest enough. We were supposed to present it at Vines last summer, but we both got COVID in the week we were supposed to present it. Yeah, so we didn't get to show it, but we're hoping this year or next year that we'll get to show it and hopefully develop it more as well.
That sounds really interesting. So yeah, I'm glad I asked the question because you all are doing interesting things and have interesting thoughts on things. What's next for Arts Assembly?
Oh gosh. Yeah. What is next? I guess the thing that we have been the most like continuous thread in our current projects is our remote research residency, which I like to refer to in a pirate voice because you can just say R, and that's essentially what it is. But it's remote research residency, and we've run it for the past 2 years, and that's been an open call for artists prioritized in rural and remotely located. But we also take a generous understanding of remoteness to include folks who are either separated from community or artistically, geographically, disconnected or isolated or experiencing remoteness in varieties of ways. So we like to be kind of open with how people interpret that and self-identify with that. And yeah, so we're hoping to run that again this year. We're waiting on to hear back from some funding to make sure that we can do that at full capacity. We did it with only 2 artists last year. The first year we worked with 6, so we'd like to be able to work with 6 again. So that's kind of our biggest like wish list that we hope happens this year, but we have lots of other stuff percolating. Meichen and I both love working with dancers and movement oriented folks and exploring, just like we did with this project, exploring what that means and continuing to ask what space does for dance and movement and what happens when you open that up and just have conversations and allow for time and space for research into that. And so yeah, that was like something out of this project that really grew roots. I mean, it's become like the thing I immediately think of is it's like become the blackberry thorn that I want to keep there. You can't get rid of it, and it just keeps giving, which is something I love about blackberries, is they've become kind of, you know, invasive. They take over, but they also are so generous with their delicious fruit. So that's kind of how I feel about this, is it's something we planted and it has just festered in the most beautiful and generous way. And that I hope we never get rid of it. So that's, I don't know, Meichen, if you want to add anything else.
Well, that's pretty perfect. Yeah, and I guess like in a less like showy public way, we're just waiting to hear back on some funds for hopefully hiring another person onto our team and like growing our organizational capacity and resilience. So that's not very like exciting for the general public, but it's very exciting for us to have like spent a lot of time considering how we want to grow the organization and for hopefully for it to outlive us. Yeah, because I just think that's an important thing in an organization, that I really believe in the work we do, but I also want to believe in it beyond me, you know?
Yeah, that makes total sense. It's been a real pleasure sharing space with you all tonight. So I know that we have a prize draw to get to, but Jess has disappeared on me, or maybe not. Maybe they're just behind their screen. Oh. Sorry, Jess, I had to wake you up from your slumber. I'm just kidding. I know it's late for you all, so let's get this prize draw out of the way for tonight. We got Donna in the space, so I'm gonna put Donna and Jess in each other's hands. Go for it, Donna.
Well, that's a nice image. In each other's hands. All right, Jess, in my hand. I've got a bag of names, shaking it. Oh, there goes my old-timey clock. I've shaken it up, and then whenever you're ready, say whatever word you'd like.
Okay. Potato.
Potato. And the winner is Linda Bartram.
Linda Bartram. Congratulations, Linda. We'll make sure that we connect with you through email to get you your prize for tonight. So thank you so much. Thank you to Whitney and Meichen and Jess and Sarah for joining us tonight and sharing space with us here on our VocalEye Almost Live platform. It's been really lovely to get to know you humans and to just witness some of the work that you're doing. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you for having
us.
VocalEye, vocaleye.ca. Special thanks to our funders, the Canada Council for the Arts, the British Columbia Arts Council, the Province of British Columbia, and the City of Vancouver.